should we throw rapists in prison? Should we do jungle or vigilante justice when we catch rapists? What's your stance on this? This is definitely a very interesting convo today. So let's get right into it.
Warning, listening to us
might radicalize you.
Hi, Kat.
Hi, Gail. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Let's skip that considering everything that's been going on for the past weekend. So just to put things into context, we are recording this the following day after the weekend where the US and Israel attacked Iran. So a lot to unpack there, but we're not
World
talking
War
about it right
Three.
now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think a lot of times our podcast starts with very long rants of, the scope of politics in the world. So maybe today let's just get right into it. For
Because
our
it is a
audience's
very
sake.
because it's a heavy
Interesting
topic that we're going to
topic.
discuss today. Yeah.
It is. So we are talking about whether rehabilitation is possible for rapists, and I think it will get a little bit specific based on why this topic came up. So recently there was a news story that two teen boys raped a 12-year-old girl, and there were actually three boys. One was 15 and I believe there was 13 and 12, and while they were raping her, they filled her mouth with stones so that she's unable to scream for
Oh my
help,
God.
and they assaulted her. So yeah, I mean, it was a news story and it was posted on Twitter, and a lot of people were outraged that young boys could do this. And then there's a very popular abolitionist feminist. I Even though I'm not an abolitionist, her handle is Obaboni. She's one of the most controversial feminist I've seen, and I actually admire a lot of her takes because she's very system focused. So I do enjoy some of her takes. So she made a tweet. I'm going to read exactly what she said so that I do not misquote her or anything. So she made a tweet, and bear in mind that this tweet is she quoted the tweet that was talking about these boys who had raped this 12-year-old girl. And in her tweet, she says that before everyone asks for the murder of these children, referring to the teen boys whose pictures had been pasted on news stories and all that, before everyone asks for the murder of these children, just know that if it is true, there is ample rehabilitation for children sex offenders who rape. The rehabilitation is very successful and it does not require incarceration. And of course, as you would take it, and a lot of people would take it, casual feminists were outraged. There was an outrage. A lot of survivors and victims thought that she was very insensitive because she could have made an independent tweet instead of quoting that tweet, and people felt like she centered the boys and their potential over the trauma that the victim is facing by saying that rehabilitation is possible for children sex offenders. So it started like a whole conversation on Twitter, and my brain was, because I understand how capitalistic the prison system is, and so I feel like to an extent I get abolitionists of the prison system because of the harm it causes, especially to marginalized people. So I got that. But also on the other hand, I understood where a lot of the casual feminists were coming from, considering most of the people who were angry were survivors and rapists. And so for them, the only way they feel like they could get some form of justice is either, like, hang them, or death to the rapists, or put them in prison, and they don't get to come out for a long time. So yeah, the abolitionists had a space yesterday for hours, and I was on it for a little while, and it sort of puts a couple of things into perspective for me. But I felt like, you know what, this is a conversation I want to have with Kat. I want to know your thoughts. I'm so sorry for the very long introduction, but I wanted to give you like a background to why we are talking about this. So to start it off, I want to know what's your stand on abolition of prisons. Are you a reformist, or do you think that we can live like life as a society without prisons? And is your decision informed by the prison system in your country? In fact, how is the prison system in your country?
So I would like to preface this by saying I lean more towards abolition, because I would say if I had to choose, I would be more of an abolitionist. I have, in fact, read a lot of Angela Davis books. And Angela Davis is a very, very staunch abolitionist. And there were actually times when I read her stuff and I was like, oh, that's a very, very radical take. I need to sit down and digest that for a bit. But I do agree with a lot of her takes. I think that it makes sense because so Angela Davis talks a lot about the prison system in the US, but I think that it applies to a lot of countries as well. For example, I would say the reason why I'm more of an abolitionist, because let's take the US, for example. When it comes to rape, since we're specifically talking about sexual violence, when it comes to rape, for so long, sexual assault was something that was used by white people as a justification, as a crime to accuse black people of, and used as a reason to lynch them and
Yeah.
to incarcerate them. And if we look at the prison system in the US right now, race still plays a very important role because a lot of the people incarcerated are black people or people of color
Yeah.
compared to white people. So that in itself is already a flaw in the prison system. Now, in Cambodia, race doesn't play as big of a role here in the prison system. However, class does. So it feels a little bit like, for example, Angela Davis said, I'm glad that you actually told me the topic ahead of time because I had to do some reading actually. And I came across this article by J.M. Moore, and they were talking about the topic. The title is "What About the Rapist? An Abolitionist Response." And they mentioned two things. They mentioned one, that rape is a crime where all men want all women to feel fear. And the second one, they quoted Angela Davis. They said something like, let me try to find it. Okay, they said Angela Davis has emphasized that rape laws were framed for the protection of men of the upper classes, right? So basically, when we're talking about the laws, they don't apply the same for men of upper classes and men of lower
Yeah.
classes. Take, for example, Epstein files, right? The sexual violence there is very, very prevalent. However, because the men are so powerful, the world leaders, the president, they're billionaires, they are not being persecuted the same way had those crimes been committed by men of lower classes, especially men of color.
Yeah.
So in many cases, in Cambodia as well, where if a man commits sexual assault and he is of lower class, he would be arrested. But if he was a person of higher class, or if he was if he has some high position in wherever, he would not be persecuted. He could just pay money and then
Yes.
he would be let go.
Yeah.
Because the prison system does not exist in a vacuum, right? We think that, okay, bad men go to prison. It does not exist in a vacuum. It exists thanks to the justice system. And we know that the justice system is very flawed. Somehow we would like for it to not be flawed. However, it is very flawed. And depending on the country, it can be very corrupt as well. So it does not exist in a vacuum. That's why I think that the prison system just doesn't work because of everything, because of the system that exists around it.
Okay. I love that because I was wondering what's your stance because I think I think I've been very confused because I thought that all abolitionist feminists. No, let me rephrase. I thought that as an intersectional feminist would not support any form of abolition. I know it's like I don't know
Mm-hmm.
where I got that idea from. So it felt very. I was just wondering that if I'm supporting that, then why am I not supporting the abolition of sex work and marriage and everything else that are systematically patriarchal or misogynistic. So yeah, I had that bit
Mm-hmm.
of confusion. I love that you gave this take because I think since yesterday I've also been trying. I started reading this study that someone shared on the timeline, and then I read a couple of other things on Google as well because I wanted to get more information because I got where the abolitionists were coming from, but I think my very initial thought every single time when I think of rapists is hang them. And I remember writing about this on my Snapchat yesterday, and I've actually come to the realization that that's not very intersectional of me. That when
Mm-hmm.
I hear that a rapist is going to prison, my only focus is on what should happen to the person because of what they did. I never take into account the system that is in place and the further harm these systems are also causing. So I had a lot to think about yesterday. I don't think I've still come to a conclusion because I've not read enough, but I'm definitely leaning more to abolition of prisons. The more I'm reading and the more I'm learning about it. So yeah, I'm glad you're an abolitionist. So now to you wanted to say something. Please go.
I actually suggest that you read Angela Davis' book called Are Prisons Obsolete?
Okay.
Because she talks in very, very great lengths about that, actually. And it was I listened to it on audiobook actually, and there was so much to wrap my head around. That is not even taken into account capitalism as well in the prison system, especially if the prison system was like in the US. So in the US, for example, incarcerated people would be used to do labor, right?
Yeah.
Prison systems in the US, prisons are privatized, and because of that, incarcerated people are used to do labor to for the private corporations at a very 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 low wage, like barely anything at all. So they are producing for the capitals at a very unlivable wage,
Yeah.
even though they are, I mean, you would argue that they are being incarcerated, so what rights do they have? But they are still
To earn
humans, right?
money.
We
Yeah.
cannot just say. Exactly. So why are they benefiting the capitalists with their labor? So the capitalists are doing that, and it creates this incentive of people being incarcerated even more because the capitalists, look at them, the bourgeoisie. I'm being very communist right now, but the bourgeoisie would look at people, especially people of color, as as more like free labor for
Yeah,
them,
cheap
for the
labor.
bourgeoisie, at
Yeah,
a very low
yeah.
cost. Exactly. So capitalism also plays a role in the prison system as well.
I I love that. I'm going to. I think her name actually came up a couple of times when I was going through some of
Hmm.
the studies. So yeah, I'm definitely going to explore that. I think Ghana prisons are very similar to yours in the sense that, I mean, we are all Africans, we are all black. So there isn't a lot of racism. Maybe racism might exist for people of mixed race, but a lot of times it's just classism where, like you said, the rich tend to get away with things because they can pay their way out. And the systems are so terrible that corruption and greed is like thriving. So they get away with these
Hmm.
things by, greasing the right palms, and then there are people in prison who have been awaiting their trial for years. Actually, I remember there was one news story like that, and it was the person had been in there for years just for petty theft, but because he hadn't
Hmm.
had his trial, he's in prison. He's in maximum security prison awaiting trial, and it's been years. And these stories are like, they're so common, they're so popular. In Nigeria, there are lots of stories about, how when your family member is missing or disappears, there's a very high chance that they've been used as a replacement in prison for maybe a rich person's relative or a rich person's son. So yeah, I definitely see how just reform might not work, especially when we are talking about the systems that uphold prison. So yeah, getting to like the meat of this conversation is, do you think rapists can be rehabilitated? And I'm I want us to divide this into two because I I've listened to so many true crime that I know that there are different, sex offenders. There are the violent sex offenders and there are non-violent sex offenders. There are child predators and like, all that. So but I want us to divide it into adult rapists and child rapists. Do you think that either of these groups can be rehabilitated and, you know reintegrated back into society for them to live with people? Is it possible? Is it not idealistic in a way?
So when I hear about rapists, my knee-jerk reaction would be just to like hang them, stone them, gut them. I know it that's my instinct, right? Because
Right.
I honestly believe that rape is a crime that cannot be justified. Because, for
Mm.
example, I'm not saying murder is right, but there can be reasons for murder,
Yeah.
right? Like self-defense or anything. So there can be reasons for that.
Yeah, and
But
sorry, let
rape
me
is a crime.
yeah. So I saw someone make a tweet that murder you can murder someone by mistake, but you can never rape
Hmm.
by mistake because the act is so extensive. It takes so much for it to be a mistake. It can never be a mistake. It's something you sat and thought of. So yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah, and it's so intentional as well. And when you murder someone, you just end their life. But when you rape someone, you're subjecting them to a lifetime of trauma and of pain. And it's such a horrendous crime that I actually believe that rape the worst, is one of the worst, if not the worst crime that someone can commit to someone else.
Yeah.
So that's the knee-jerk reaction. But however, when I sit back and think about it, it is not really fair for me to say that I'm an abolitionist. I believe in abolishing prisons. However, prisons should stay for rapists because that sounds hypocritical of me. So I had to sit down and ignore that instinct, ignore that knee jerk hate for rapists for a while and start to analyze it critically. which was why I had to do some reading as well to see what are other abolitionists' perspective on rapists. And back again to that article by J.M. Moore, they mention a few things. So, one, they mentioned that rape is basically, I don't even know where to start. Okay, they mentioned that right now in the current system that we have, we put a lot of emphasis on the perpetrator. We don't really put a lot of emphasis on the survivor or the victim. It's always about finding the perpetrator, getting them to trial, punishing them, while dragging the victim or the survivor to go on trial to
Yeah.
relive their trauma.
Yeah.
So it's always about the perpetrator, right? Even if we say that, oh, we just want to punish the perpetrator, we are still focusing on the perpetrator rather than what the survivor or the victim wants and what they need. And we have this very binary view of what the justice system should do to rapists. Either we should imprison them or we should let them go. It's a very binary view, and it should not be that way, because rapists don't exist in a vacuum, right?
Yeah.
Rapists they're not born rapists. They are the product and the result of society, of a patriarchal and misogynistic society. But however, the system that we have right now, we treat the perpetrators as individuals. We don't treat them as a system, but we treat them as individuals, as rotten, as bad apples, where we don't try to find the thing that causes the rot in the first place. So we treat them like, oh, other men are functioning members of society, but this man or this perpetrator is a bad person, so we just punish this person. When in fact it does not work like that. Because if you think about it, if incarceration works, if the justice system works, then there wouldn't be rapists anymore. But they're still rapists because they exist because of the system that kind of breeds them, right? If we watch the TV show Adolescence, for
Yeah.
example,
Yeah.
we can see how men like that came to be, how boys like that came to be. It's not, you can't just put men in prison while allowing red pill ideology, while allowing Andrew Tate, while allowing people like Nick Fuentes to go around and spread their poison and then think that incarcerating perpetrators will solve the problem. That's not how it works. So we need to tackle the system by focusing on the victims, focusing on the survivors, rather than putting the emphasis on the perpetrators. So, for example, rather than pooling resources on trying to incarcerate the perpetrators, we should pool the resources that we have on creating shelters, on creating refuges, on creating free mental health care and support for survivors and for the victims instead, so that we are focusing on them, so that if anything like that happens to them, they are able to seek support. They know that they are more important than the perpetrator. They know that the emphasis is on them. They know that the narrative is to focus on them. Because if you think about it, for example, when rape happens, we hear more about the perpetrator's name
Yes.
than we ever hear or think about the victim, even the victim or the survivor becomes faceless. We just think about the perpetrator. So that's one of the examples why we focus on, to show that we focus on the perpetrator a lot. I'm gonna cut it here. I have more things to say, but I'm gonna cut it here because I'm ranting. So I'm gonna give it back to you. I'm gonna hand it back to
I
you.
loved the ranting because you were making amazing points. Because when I thought of rehabilitation, I was also struggling how that will work and how that will center survivors. I think our next question was how it will look like for survivors, which you've touched on. I don't know if you have more points on that. But yeah, I think one of my questions was how rehabilitation is going to center survivors. When, because if we are rehabilitating, it means we are rehabilitating the rapists. It means we are trying to, you know, sort of help them unlearn like all these learned behaviors that they've had. Because I also do not ascribe to the idea that people are inherently that evil, because it's an evil act. I don't ascribe to that idea. Again, I'm like a true crime junkie. So a lot of times when I listen to stories of like, sex offenders, even when it comes to children, it's learned behavior. A lot of them were abused as children.
Yeah.
A lot of them grew up with, parents who did that. I recently 2 days ago I listened to this serial offender whose dad was, a pedophile, and he went so many years, and people thought, oh, he was okay. And in his very adult age, he started approaching like young girls as well. So it's a lot of time is learned behavior. They probably know that it's wrong, but also I've seen my mother do it. I've seen my father do it. It's been done to me. If it's so wrong, why then did it happen to me? And then they go on. So I definitely agree with, targeting it from that side. But I think I'm still struggling to figure out how it still centers. So I get your point, okay, about all the capital being funneled into prison systems to be funneled into systems rather for survivors. But then we still need capital to ensure that these rapists are rehabilitated. So is it really possible to get both? I mean, I know that right now, survivors are so not centered in a lot of cases, because even I think our knee-jerk reaction to rapists does not center survivors either. We just think of what
Yeah.
should happen to the rapist. Nobody, barely, even on Twitter when this whole thing was going on, I remember one of the arguments one of the abolitionists was making is that no one has asked what situation the victim is in. No one has asked about her name or whatever. People are just angry,
Yeah.
and their anger is, of course, rightfully directed towards these two boys who were the offenders. But if your anger is not centering the survivor, then I don't think you are doing what you think you are doing. So I'm trying to understand, how will this rehab for rapists and rehab for survivors work together?
So I'm gonna talk about two things that kind of pick up on my rant. One is what Angela Davis was mentioning in her book "Are Prisons Obsolete?" about police, right? Because a lot of people would say, oh, well, if we don't have the police, if we don't have the prisons anymore, then who's going to stop the crime? But then she made the argument that that's the thing. Police are there to stop the crime, to react to the crime that has already
Happen.
happened. Right? They don't prevent crimes. Police don't prevent crimes, but they stop crimes that have already happened, which means that we already have victims. We already have survivors. So rather than preventing crime, our current system right now is to react to crime, which means that we're still going to keep on having victims and survivors because we're not cutting it at the root. We're not cutting it before it can actually happen. We're not cutting the rot before it actually causes the rot. So if you look at Epstein, for example, Jeffrey Epstein, the whole thing happened because the system allowed people like him to have power, to have connection. It allowed people like him to be created, right? Because right now, even if we put all of the client list, everyone on the Epstein list in jail, it does not change the fact that the system that caused that allowed that to happen, that enabled that to happen in the first place, it does not go away. It just means that there will be another Jeffrey Epstein when the opportunity arises because we are not changing the system. So again, we're back to the what we should do is not reacting to the crime, but rather to prevent the
Yeah.
crime. And prisons don't prevent crime. Prisons react to crime. Um, One of the things that in the article they also mentioned is what happens to perpetrators that have already committed a crime. Then we're talking about preventing, but then what if it already happens? And I know that the answer is not completely black and white because again it's not binary, but one of the things that they mentioned was about centering the victim or the survivor by asking them what they want, right? What do they want from this? Do they want financial compensation? Do they want to get a divorce? If they want to get a divorce, the system should be there to help them get a divorce, to help them with mental health, to help them financially. Do they want financial compensation from the perpetrator? Do they want a restraining order? What do they want? So it's more like a case by case basis, centering the victim, centering the survivor, rather than us deciding what they want for
Yeah.
them.
Okay, I get that. But what if it's a case where the survivor is not around anymore? Do they ask the family members what they would want?
I suppose so. So bear in mind that I'm also processing
This.
this as well. I think it's a very complicated.
Yeah.
It's very, very complicated because again, the knee-jerk reaction is, well, why don't we just, I don't know, stone
Yeah.
them to death? But then if we're talking about in the case where the survivor is not around anymore, they have unalived the survivor, that would be treated as murder, right? So
Okay.
if we say
Yeah.
that we incarcerate rapists who have murdered the victim, what about murderers who have murdered their victims? Not rapists, but murderers. Do we put them in the same category or we only put rapists in that category? You see how when you make an exception to one group,
Yeah,
it can be a slippery slope?
yeah, it's a very complex issue because I see a lot of the abolition arguments that I came across. I think also because I was specifically looking for, ones on sex offenders. But then where do
Mm-hmm.
the other offenders go to if we are abolishing prison systems? Where do people like, murderers and, people who commit tax fraud and like all those? I know there's a conversation for another time. Maybe after I read the book, we can have another episode generally on
Mm-hmm.
prison systems. But I'm not, even though my brain is coming up with like all these other complex situations, I'm going to hold myself in check so that we just focus on, rapists and sex offenders for now. But yeah, I get you. You want to say something?
I do think that it is very complex because there are a lot of emotions involved when it comes to sexual violence, especially because we're women. And I also understand that there is no one perfect
Yeah.
answer when it comes to abolition, when it comes to abolition prisons, because it's not like we say this is the perfect recipe, this is what we do to rapists, this is what we do to rapists who murder their victims, because then again it becomes
Yeah.
binary, right? And the problem is not binary. So I understand the frustration because when I was looking into it, when I was thinking about it, I also don't have one perfect solution. It's not like we say, okay, rapists will go there. They will go to an island called whatever just by themselves. We don't have that solution. But I do want to stress that the one thing about the one thing about abolition that we focus on is that that we're criticizing the system that is already in place, that it is not working. So if it is not working, why are we still upholding? Sorry, why are we still upholding
Yeah,
it?
yeah, I see your point. But I, I'm personally not opposed to an island where we send all the rapists. They can fight it
Agree.
out. They can fight it out. Survival of the fittest. Where I remember someone saying that, our ancestors, when they did not have prison systems, they still found like ways to, um ensure that these people are held accountable one way or the other. And in Africa, one of the most popular things they used to do was exile. So they exile people out of communities. So you probably be sent out into the evil forest, because we believe in all kinds of witches and like spiritual entities and gods. So there are forests that are tagged as evil forests because people go in and they never come out and all that. So there's actually a lot of African movies on these where when someone does something bad in the community, they just exile them. So they usually had like caves or something, structures that they will keep the perpetrator in, and to await trial. And once trial is completed, you are exiled. You cannot come close to where people are living. You cannot see someone and talk to them, and like all those things. And I remember someone say, a Nigerian say, well, maybe we should go back to that. But I don't know how that's going to work, considering how modernized the world has become now. I mean, we barely even have green forest. Talk of like, evil forest where we can exile them to. But
Yeah.
yeah, we should have an island where we send all the reapers. I think I would definitely fuck with that way more than killing them, because I remember people asking about what about people who actually end up unaliving their abusers. And I remember this radical feminist saying that a lot of times people think that it's as easy as that, but murder is not something you commit and then you can just live your life as if nothing happened. It takes a toll, even on people
Yeah.
who were able to victims who were able to, like, unalive their offenders. It takes a toll. It's not something that they it does not make them feel better about what happened to them. So I I also fuck with asking victims what they would want us to do with the people who cause them any form of harm. I think this has been an amazing conversation. I've gotten like a lot of insights, and now I even have a book to read. So I'll definitely be coming back on WhatsApp to come and ask you a few questions. But yeah, I think this has put a lot of things in perspective, because I was ranting on my Snapchat yesterday, and I think I did come to the conclusion that I believe in rehabilitation, but only for children sexual offenders, because I don't know if an adult man is like, can be as receptive and open to changing from their misogynistic behaviors. But now when I think about it, that also feels a bit reactive, because then I'm trying to say that adult men in general cannot change from being misogynistic and patriarchal to, like, being progressive. So I this has put us into perspective. So someone sent me a text saying that when they hear rehabilitation for for sex offenders, it feels very faith based and not practical.
You know what? That's what people say about socialism, and that's what people say about communism as well. They keep saying that's the argument that people use. They say it's so utopian. People are inherently selfish. It's human's nature to be selfish. We're not gonna work as a collective. But the thing is, if you look at it, misogyny is not deeply ingrained by nature, right? Naturally, we're not
Yeah.
misogynistic. It's the system that enabled that prop that up. So it's not that it's utopian, it's that we're so used to living in a world where misogyny, where patriarchy is so prevalent that we can't think of a society that does not have that. We are so used to living in a capitalistic society that we cannot imagine a world where people are able to live
Yeah.
collectively, where people can own the means of production, because we think that that's just The capitalists, the bourgeoisie, they taught us that, just like how people taught us that, how patriarchy has taught us that this is
Yeah.
default,
Yeah.
right? That patriarchy is normal, that patriarchy is natural, that men are bad. So I think that it's utopian because we have been conditioned to believe that there is no other
Yeah.
way.
Yeah. I see that. I definitely see that. Uh I I don't. It's been an amazing and insightful conversation because I was all up in my head last night, and even though I felt like I had gotten perspective and I was leaning very much towards abolishing and rehabilitation, I knew that I needed to talk to you. So I'm glad we had this conversation.
I have I have another final thing to
Okay.
add. This is about communism and about socialism, but it can also be applied in this case. So I was watching a video last night. I forgot who it was, but she was talking about human nature and about communism, basically dissecting whether it goes against human nature to whether communism is against human nature. And she at one point mentioned incentive. She said that right now the system incentivizes individualistic, just like how the system incentivizes
Yeah.
patriarchy and misogyny.
Yeah.
So she mentioned an example of a place that she used to work, a retail store. She said at that retail store, her manager gave incentive to the staff as a group. So if everyone could achieve the KPIs, if everyone could reach a certain threshold, then everyone is rewarded equally, rather than in a traditional company where you have to hit your own KPI, and if you do well then you get rewarded, and it's not equal. But in the place that she was working, even though it was still under capitalism, but her manager rewarded everyone equally. So the incentive was for everyone to
Work
work
together.
collectively
Yes.
rather than individually. Yeah, and if one person is trying to sabotage the other person, then they are sabotaging everyone, including themselves. So the incentive here, it it reinforces collectiveness by encouraging everyone to work as a collective. So that is just a small example of what socialism and ultimately communism can look like, because if we incentivize collectiveness, then people would be inclined to do that. However, the current system, we incentivize individualistic.
Yeah.
We incentivize, like, if one person can sell the highest amount, then they would get
The
the most
most, yeah.
incentive, they would get the most bonus. Exactly. So it got me thinking, what if that's also the case in our current system, where we incentivize patriarchy, where we incentivize men who are misogynistic? It causes this. But what if we create a system where we incentivize matriarchy, where we incentivize equality, where we incentivize respect for women? Wouldn't that encourage men to also respect women?
I I I perfectly see where you're coming from. I love talking
It's
to
a lot
you.
to take in.
Yes, but I still love talking to you because, like, I think a lot of times you always answer a lot of the questions, and even if they are not fully answered, I get more perspective when we have conversations about things.
I love this topic too.
Yeah, it was an interesting one, very complex because yeah, like you said,
Agreed.
there's a lot of emotions. So there were lots of people talking about how the tweet was insensitive, and yeah, I get that. But I think so. I came to a realization that you know the tweet. This lady who is an abolitionist is very system focused, but a lot of the cultural feminists are basing their reaction on their personal and lived experience. And it made me think that your feminism that centers only your lived and personal experience is actually politically limiting, because you are only thinking
It's not
about,
intersectional.
you're only thinking about what happens to you. You're only thinking about what happens to the people around you. You don't care about anyone else like outside. I feel like that's where thefts, a lot of thefts also come from, where they are always talking about how I never want to share a bathroom. I'm like, babe, you're in Ghana, you're in Nigeria. How many trans people do you actually see walking around openly? How many people have come out as trans in Africa? I mean, even just being a lesbian, being gay, and this is not to say that being gay or lesbian is easier than being trans, but we know how much vitriol is always targeted, especially at trans people. That's why I'm having this conversation this way. It's not to say that the struggles of gays and lesbians and bisexuals and non-binary people are minimal or anything like that. But yeah, I think we need to be transformative, and I love revolutionary feminists who talk about systems, who want to change the systems, who want to do something, have conversations about systems. But I mean, yeah, you can center your feelings, but I don't think if the past feminists only centered their feelings, we would own bank accounts right now. You, at some point, you need to get intersectional, you need to get radical, you need to think outside of the things you feel, because only that is not transformative. You are not going to you're not going to build anything for the generations ahead if all your politics centers around your feelings. Then what are we doing here? I feel like this is a whole new conversation we are getting into, so I'm going to stop yapping.
A little bit.
I'm going to stop yapping. But yeah, it's been amazing, and yeah, I just hope anybody who watches this episode gets as much information, at least some level of clarity from this discussion. And as always, thank you so much for joining us for today's episode. And you can catch us on all social media platforms as Unholy Feminists. You can listen to us on podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, like any podcast app. You can listen to us also at Unholy Feminists. And please don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to like our videos. Don't forget to share our videos if you like them. I know you like them. I know you enjoy them. I mean, look at us. We are two gorgeous, amazing, and intelligent women. I know you love the things we say. So share our videos. And until next week, bye.
Bye.